mid-size naked bike sector is becoming increasingly important for motorcycle manufacturers across the world. Motorbikes like the Yamaha Z800 and the Ducati Monsters have been huge sales successes in Europe and America. And now we've got this one, the Kawasaki Z800. Okay, so about 120 miles today on the 2016 Kawasaki Z800. This bike's been around now for a few years in Australasia, Europe. It hasn't managed to make its way to the US until this year, but you'll be able to buy one in basically every state other than California. The Californian model is going to come in 2017. So we'll start with the engine, 806 cc's. It's a great little engine. It's got lots of torque. It's actually really smooth off the throttle as well. You can, it doesn't have that real sort of hit that you get from something like a Z1000. That was one of my big complaints when I rode the 1000, is that initial opening of the throttle was a little bit harsh. It's much nicely better mapped on the 800. As far as engine torque goes, it's actually, surprisingly, it's got a fair amount. You can, we dropped this thing down to about 2,500 RPM in 6th gear, bunch of roll-ons, and it'd just track nicely. Fueling was really good. Once you hit around the sort of 6,000–7,000 RPM mark, it did start to, you could feel that kick like you do with all four-cylinder engines really. However, it is a bit vibey. If you're sitting a little bit too high gear, you'll start to really feel it come through especially the pegs, but also a little bit in your fingers. So it pays to keep it a gear higher, let it do its thing, let it sort of sit around the 6,000 RPM to 8,000 RPM range, and then you're going to have a nice sort of cruisy ride. Gearbox is really good. Once you don't need a quick shifter with this thing. It's really nice and smooth. Now, the suspension is limited. Once you start to really push it, it will protest. But again, like the engine, if you're smooth and you just let it do its thing, if you're not heavy on the brakes and you're not throwing a thing into corners, it'll track quite nicely. It's designed for smooth city riding. This is going to be a great city bike. Canyon riding with your mates and that kind of stuff, but it's not really designed for out and out sport riding, and you can kind of feel that in the shock a little bit. The sort of bump absorption when you start to pick up the speed could be a little bit better. The ergonomics are pretty good for me. I'm 6'1" and probably weigh a little bit more than I should, but the peg to, like the seat to peg to bar ratio is really nicely thought out. I mean, if you're over sort of 6'4", 6'5", then yeah, it's probably going to be a bit too small for you. But this actually feels a little bit more roomy, funnily enough, than the 1000. The 1000's quite compact, whereas this one you get a bit more sort of leg room, and it doesn't hurt your backside quite as much over a long ride. One of the things I'm not a big fan of is the dash on this. The fact with the Speedo on the right hand side of the overall dash, I would have liked the Speedo to have been in the centre of the dash. That can actually get a bit off-putting, because a couple of times I looked down expecting to see it and I had to see it to the right. Now you can configure that, but you can only change the way the revs go. The revs on this bike are rising bottom to top. You can change that to go down bottom. Other things I do like is I really like these sort of green accents on the down here. It sort of tells you that you're still riding a Kawasaki, but conversely, I do think it's a little bit too black. This is only one colour. You only get one colour with this bike, so I would have liked to have seen a little bit of silver maybe thrown in there, because it's a very angular design, and if it's too black, you don't actually see it. So it would have been nice for a little bit more colour in there, but I mean, look, overall, you're paying, I think, just a touch under 8.4 for this bike. Now that's pretty good value. I mean, it's a little bit heavy. It's a little bit on the heavier side so I guess if you're going to go up in something like a Street Triple Triumph or an Z800 Yamaha, for instance. But it's a very solid bike. It's got great build quality. The engine's really good. The chassis, as I say, is a little bit limited, but it sort of suits the character. It's not a track bike by any means. It's going to be a great bike for just cruising around the city on, if you're going to the beach or whatever. It's going to be a really good bike for that, and it's going to be a great bike to get to and from work. good pillion seat pad as well, so you can chuck the better half on the back, and they're going to be relatively comfortable. But yeah, for 8.4 you're getting a pretty good bike out of this new Z800 Kawasaki.